So the first thing I wanted to show is Vasily is working on some stuff regarding knowing how Redis is used by stage groups, and he's added kind of a wrapper around um, Rails.cache that can be used like as a drop-in replacement, but when initializing it, you need to pass in a feature category, call site, that kind of thing. So that means, let me share my screen. Wait, no, let me first clean up my screen a bit and then share. That we can have cache metrics. So this shows cache hit ratios by feature category and call site. So then we can see where things are coming from and how things change. This is the like a first step. We're going to he's going to be adding that everywhere. And the idea is then also to build like maybe structured keys. So when we do a scan of the Redis key space, we can see what a key belongs to reuse that kind of information in a key, but that's like kind of far out. We can also add more metrics here. Like now it's just cache hit and miss that we measure. We also measure the duration of the cache generation. So if it's a cache miss, how long does it take to generate? That's in there. Other things that we could add there is the size of the thing going into the cache, but there's some difficulty there regarding compression and whatnot. Yeah, so
But
that's what
when you say there's difficulty regarding compression, do you mean we'd be measuring it before it's compressed?
Yes.
But we want to know the compressed size. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's what Vasily is working on. I'll link the epic from the doc later. This is part of like getting some attribution on cache usage, on Redis usage related to stage groups.
Is it a problem to measure the uncompressed size?
I don't think it is. Like, problem.
If you want to know who's using a lot of the cache, then uncompressed data like is as good as an indicator, I think, as compressed data.
Yeah, I guess it depends how compressible it is, but none of the things we're looking at here actually relate to the size anyway, right? And these are all pretty good while they were looking at here. I've still got my tab on the Thanos tab, so what that tells me is that the content SHA has a very high hit rate and it's not very expensive to regenerate, whereas the protected branches hash service set thing has a lower hit rate but is more expensive to generate. Yeah.
And the thing is, like, it's a drop-in replacement for Rails.cache. Well, everything active support cache thing, whatever it is. So the idea would be to, start using that instead. I don't know if there's something magical we could do that makes everybody use it, but this was easy to do because we already separated off Redis repository cache. So yeah.
Can we I think Andrew might actually be typing the same thing, or maybe it's a related point. Can we figure out how many, how much unattributed, not sure, cache usage there is by endpoint, like in the logs or something, and then sort of go back to stage groups and say like, hey, source code, makes a bunch of requests that have cache attribution and some other group doesn't.
That's a very good idea.
Because then we can tell people like, you seem to be using the cache a lot, but we can't tell how.
So another thing that is in there is the caller ID, and that's just from the context.
Oh, great. Well, then we can just do this with the metrics. Then we don't even need logs.
Well, the thing is, we haven't dropped this in everywhere yet. So
I know, but I mean, we can join to. Can we join to one that has cache operations by caller ID? Do we have one of those? Not sure. Maybe we do need the logs.
Yeah, because looking at it now, this is many more caller
Isn't
IDs
that
than I thought.
combination? Yeah, isn't that combination of keys going to really blow up?
Yeah, that's what I'm seeing now.
Seems
which is
like
a bit
I
surprising.
mean, yeah,
Can
because
you just, yeah, like that's
that's too many things.
the API one is used in 3 places, but the other one is used like apparently everywhere. So
Yeah, so I need to take that back to Vasily and say, let's not include caller ID. That's too bad.
Yeah, because that'll blow up. Like
Yeah.
we need honeycomb before we can do that. So the way that the caller uses it, it basically looks like a Redis client.
It looks like rails.cache, rails.cache.
Okay.
Yeah, that thing.
Okay. Then how does it know how long the hits took? Is because does Rails.cache use a yield or something like that?
Yes.
Okay. So okay. And okay, that's brilliant. So my question is really, this is great, but like, unless we can use it in a way that we can drive change with it, it's not going to be as useful as it could be, right? So how do we use this? Like, is there a way that we can kind of include this in a budget? Like, have you thought about that? I mean, I'm sure there is, but I'm more wondering if it's been thought about.
Was like, we started with metrics because it was easy. Like, we can't, the end game was seeing total usage like we have for the database. We say this table is owned by source code management and it's 50 gigabytes in size or whatever.
Like we do, I'm not even the popular. Yeah,
So that's the end game, but there's currently like 2 IDs floating around on how to do that. One is measuring the throughput there, like but with cached and not cached, and the other is periodically scanning this key space and attributing it to a feature category and then including it to the report that Sean and Stephanie are building. But that's currently not really used yet.
So just as a side point, another way we can use this actually is with feature flags, right? Because I've had this in the past where I've been reviewing an MR and someone's added a cache, like a Redis cache for something, and I'm like, yeah, but is this like, is the usage pattern of this endpoint, it's called a lot for the same data, or is it called for different data all the time? Like, what's the actual like expected hit rate of this? And it's quite hard for someone to answer that, and it's also quite hard for us to answer after the fact, like how useful that cache is. But if we can put it behind a feature flag or just measure it after rolling it out, then we can say like, oh, we can see the hit rate for this specific cache is like 30%, and it takes no time to generate. So actually, it's kind of pointless. For instance,
that's what we could do with the metrics already.
Yes, exactly. That's what I mean. Sorry, yeah. Like this is one way we could use this already, but that's in a non-structured way. That's not like aggregating data. That's just saying like on a case-by-case basis, like I want to know how effective my change has been or is going to be, and this is a way for showing that.
Yeah. So do we want to have that in something like error budgets that the teams are already looking at, or do we want to have a new thing?
It's not an error budget because it's not like the SLIs, right? But it sort of ties in with like, is there a way that we can say that this team generates this much traffic, but generates, this percentage of Redis and
but it's only
Postgres,
used this much? Yes.
And because you know what it's going to be, basically it's going to be like the the container scanning,
security scanners,
yeah, and it's always those kind of those parts, but the problem is that you've got to come up with a single number where you mix in like, well, like this is how much of this there is, and like with Postgres, right, it's like this is how much auto vacuum this group is generating, this is how much CPU, this is how many connections, and then you've got to kind of come up with a way of mixing all those things together to come up with some sort of metric. And that's the really difficult part, because I think a lot of people just think, well, it's not really a real, it's a synthetic number, which it is, but you got to make it that it kind of reflects reality in some way.
Yeah, and we also can't measure Redis CPU. I know that the cache, so most of it's going to be like get and set, but we can't measure Redis CPU with this because it's a client-side metric, right? So if we're doing like we had the issue with like S members or whatever with stuff before, like we can't measure that in this way, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But when the keys would be structured, like if we change the keys and do that whole migration, we could, couldn't we?
We could know that from the slow log, but I don't
Yes.
know if we could. But I don't know if we can know for all commands that are run.
Yeah, because you can have,
unless we
you can
capture
have
the
a very
traffic and,
fast command. Sorry, I'm gonna have to go again.
I don't think we can measure all of them, but if we can measure the
Yeah.
expensive ones, then
Yeah, but I think what Andrew was going to say was if we have a command that is in principle fast, but
it's called
happens,
so often.
but it's called a lot, like we don't capture that. But I think this is like, sort of down the line stuff. I think initially it's quite useful just for poking around manually, if nothing else. Like I said, like, if there's something, I mean, the two hit rates you've shown here are what, around 85% and around 98%, which both sound okay, but it would be interesting to see that across like a wider variety of cache identifiers and see like, are there some that look like they're really low? And if so, like, what are we doing with that cache? Like, why are we doing it? But Jakob's been working on a cache thing for like, something slightly different, and there's a lot of variables and there's not necessarily one answer that's like the right answer. So I don't think we can put that into a table to tell people. I think that sort of thing would just have to be
Ad hoc.
yes.
Well, I think if you have a new data source, it's also okay to start with ad hoc analysis and learn what you can learn from the data source and how you can use it. And over time, maybe realize like, well, okay, if we can see like with Redis optimizations, I think it's become very clear that just the sheer volume of requests is often the most important useful thing to optimize. So I think it's good to think about automation, but it's also okay to just do things by hand for a while and learn how they work.
Yeah, and that also gives you some ideas of how you would want to aggregate it in future. So yeah.
Yeah, I don't think you can really guess how you would do that until you've got the data and you can look at it and start like figuring that out. But it's just an interesting like next step afterwards. But
what is interesting about this is as well is that we slot it in between, so that means we can add more things to it. Like now we're just adding metrics because like that was the easiest thing to do at the first time, but we could start writing stuff out to files. We can like whatever we want, no? If we're in between.
yeah.
Well,
Okay.
another very good first step, of course, would be because this is only for repository cache, right?
Right now, it's for 2 endpoints that Vasily just added,
Yeah.
but
Just getting it out there across all uses of Rails.cache, because I think if we're lucky, we can just make Rails.cache be this thing. So if any developer types
that's the idea.
Rails.cache, they get this thing. Yeah.
That's the idea. The problem is that we do need some kind of like there's a manual thing, or everything was going to be not owned. Do you know what I mean? Like we need them to say, "This is me. This is owned by."
So you would do like rails.cache fetch whatever, and then there would be an additional feature category like keyword argument or something and cache identifier argument.
Yeah, it's you initialize a client with a feature category, and that does Rails.cache in the backend.
Ah, nice. Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Well, that is another interesting problem to look at, like how to get everybody to go through this mechanism to get a wide.
We were thinking because the like as we've seen from the cache instance, most things are rails.cache.fetch, and it's a drop-in replacement for that. So my idea would be to drop it in, like just doing a find and replace and let the specs call out if it doesn't work. And having it with not owned to start with, and then start attributing like we did for controllers and sidekick jobs and all of that stuff.
We could also have a lint check that fails if you use rails.cache.
Yep, that's
Why? Am I hearing it right that Rails developers aren't suggesting monkey patching the underlying Rails.cache or Rails cache?
I think we have enough monkey patches on redis.rb and active support stuff and so on that I did less like I.
But you
I
don't
was-
even have to monkey patch it. Can't you just? It's you should be able to put your own cache object or cache implementation into Rails. It shouldn't be wedded to
Totally.
the ones
Can
it
we
knows
do
about.
that?
But Andrew, the problem, as I'm hearing it, is that we need to say somewhere what who the owner is. So the
That's a
owner
manual
is
thing.
injected when the client object is
I
instantiated.
thought we'd get that from the metadata.
But that's assuming that like the metadata being what we have now as a feature category. That's assuming like as we've seen now with the caller ID, the protected
Right.
branches thing is called from everywhere.
Yeah.
But we
yeah.
want source
Okay,
code
but
to
you
be
want the
responsible,
owner
but
to-
it's also
right.
used. Yeah. So
Okay. And what is the, out of interest, what is the gate you go through to set the owner? Is it like, how's that set?
the client.new with a feature category.
Okay. Right. Okay. I mean, because the other way that you could do it is like, and I don't want to kind of spike things too much here, but like if you entering a block of code where the ownership of everything inside there, Postgres, Redis, changes to a different team, right? You could
Yeah.
almost have like a yield block or something where
I
you
was
like
thinking
enter
that was
that.
my first idea, like wrapping it in application context with
Yeah.
feature category something
Yeah.
else, like
Because then it's for Postgres and Redis and whatever Elasticsearch, whatever you want, right? File system rights can all be attributed in the same way to the same team. Does that make sense? Was it not possible?
It is possible, and the framework that we already have for the context could do that, and then everything in between
Yeah.
is for
Like
that
you
group.
almost enter and then leave another team's sort of code, and then everything inside there is owned by that team.
Yeah.
And they don't have to kind of remember to do this as much.
I decided against that for this because if
Too big.
yeah, yes, because you would add a block then in something that is now, well, repository class is maybe not a good example. But then we'd start, for example, at the controller, and as we see now, like not everything within that controller should be owned by the one team, and then
yeah, it's also difficult to know, like, because you've got to know what the boundaries of where people are entering into those things are. It's not an easy problem to solve.
yeah, and there's also the thing of in some cases we push something on the context, but it's not in a yield block, and then that is for everything. Like then it's sequential. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Okay.
But that's an interesting thing to think about for not for this, but for everything.
Yeah, like if say for notes or for to-dos or something, and there's always like you add to-dos from all over the show. I don't know if that's a good example, but like when you enter that code, it kind of
everything from this moment forward
inside that block. Yeah.
I think that might be interesting to do. Here I'm going to propose monkey patching. We monkey patch everything, like everything Ruby, and we put in. No, dumb idea. Like, I'm going to move on to the next thing.
Yeah,
Python would be quite easy to do that with like @annotations on functions, but we're not using Python.
I think this is a fundamental problem for what we're doing with error budgets and our monolithic code base. And I also remember from reading the SRE book that it was that they were saying like, yeah, people are on the fence or divided on how to attribute resource usage. Like, when do you attribute it to the team that owns the resource, or when do you attribute it to the team that makes the call that consumes the resource? And it's this sort of problem that you have to that we're talking about?
Not, I don't think it is, because we're going into a direction where we have this team. We call them stage groups, and they're building their thing. And now have teams on the other side in reliability that are the stable counterparts or whatever. And then it's going to be a collaboration. Like, we know that this is for this feature, and then it's up to a small group of people to decide who's going to act on whatever. Is it
That's not what I
counterpart?
meant. So we were talking about protective branches, and you're saying lots of different features use protective branches. So who do we count? Whose budget or spend does a use of protective branches count towards? Do we have a clear, apart from the technical implementation, do we have an answer to that question? Like, do we know as an organization who we want to attribute that to? It sounds like you want to attribute it to the caller, to the consumer. So
yeah,
if somebody, so protected branches would be a source code feature, but if somebody other than source code does something that needs a protected branch, then we're saying that feature category, stage group is accessing the cache.
No, I
I
think we
don't
would
think
do it the other
so.
way around.
Yeah, I think that, you know, if the feature, if it needs to be called because we have this feature called protected branches,
Then it's up to
then
source code
it's on
management.
them. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's
You
on
want to
it's their
attribute it to source codes.
Yes. So
Yeah.
if pipelines need protected branches to know what if the branch is like the branch the pipeline is running on is protected or not, then it needs a way to figure out if this branch is protected in an efficient way, and it's source code that's responsible to make sure that they can do that in an efficient way. Is my thinking.
Yeah, and context objects get set at the controller level on the outer layer
They
when
are
something
right
comes
now.
in. Yeah, so they are never the right thing, because you then go through everything and you touch things that owned by different teams and different layers of the call stack.
But these things can be narrowed down, like as Andrew mentioned. Now we just set it on the outside, on the controller or the API endpoint or the Sidekick job. But we could set it again, like override it for certain pieces of code. Like, for example, when you do something inside the repository.rb class, it's owned by source code. So if you call out to
Yeah, but what you're then recreating is the call stack. So we use thread local storage to remember the context of the request. And then you have a long call stack and you go all over the place, and the Ruby language knows where you are in the call stack and what file you're in. It's about files, really. We want to attribute things to files, and files are owned
methods, I'd say.
stage, or methods in files. But those are all things that are part of the language and of the call stack. So that seems like if all the time when we're calling functions, we are having this parallel call stack for our own observability, then we're slowing down Ruby and we're sort of recreating the structure of the code. So that's why I think when Andrew says there should be annotations, that makes sense, because annotations would become part of the code.
Yeah.
need to wait for Ruby 4.
Well, I'm pretty sure you can already set a variable on a method. It's an object, isn't it?
Yeah, but it's quite nice to have it like sort of outside, you know, instead of actually
Yeah.
having have it declarative rather than imperative. But
Yes, like having like just before the def, you've got
yeah,
feature
at.
category something.
Okay, well, thanks for clarifying which what our worldview is. So our worldview is that resource usage is attributed to the owner of the code and not the caller.
I think we just made that call right now during this. I don't know if that's where the organization is going, but like, yeah.
Well, you already made that call by the way you and Facility are setting up the metrics.
Yes, it's not used for anything yet, so there's plenty of time for people to object.
Well, let's not assume they object, right? You have a strategy now.
Yeah. Shall we move on to the next point? Calliope, yes, we have this. I'll reply later. So the next point, let me share my screen again. The next point is about historical data in Tamland. See if that's running. Yes. I've generated the Tamland pages site with 360 days of history here. And I was wondering, shall we just always do that or not? It's easy to do. It didn't take much longer than a normal run does because we have all this data cached.
So why didn't we do this already? Or how
Because
did we pick the current number?
The current number was picked upon because we used to call out to Thanos for every run. And then we added a cache, and then we added a more reliable cache. You remember the data warehouse in the, what is it? One of the package components. Like we upload a zip every time to GitLab.
Oh, right. That crazy idea I I was selling.
Yeah, you sold it and it works well.
What is it? Is it different from the CI cache?
It's
That was
different
the way
from
we
the
used
CI
to do
cache
it.
because the CI cache, like would at random moments not be available, and then we have to refetch everything again. So now
Oh,
we do that manually, and it's stored in here.
It's a versioned artifact, and we're
Yes.
using one of GitLab's many artifact storage, package storage
The
features to,
package registry, it's
yeah.
called.
ah,
So
oh my goodness.
Thanos
Okay.
cache data,
And it's more reliable than the cache, than the CI cache.
Well, you
Yeah.
control which version is stored because with
Yeah.
CI cache, it's the
Right.
thing of the last run.
Yeah. And
So
do you
here,
do you clean up the old ones?
yeah, we clean up the old one. There's only one.
Awesome.
How can I?
It's version 1, which keeps getting overwritten.
I know that's the download. You see, it's 70 megabytes now, and if you decompress it, it's like almost a gig.
Wow. Is it all a Parquet file?
Yes, all Parquet files, not a single one, but yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, once you've extracted it, we now have about a year's worth of data. Soon we'll have more, but I think a year might be good enough to show. I'm not hearing any objections. Like it does compress everything a little bit.
What was the old number?
The
6
old number
months?
was
9 months.
180 days.
Plus 30, plus
Yeah,
60.
30. Yeah, 180 historical and 60.
30. Yeah, 30. Yeah, sorry, 60. Yeah.
60 prediction.
Yeah. So now it's a year plus 60.
Yeah.
And you haven't thought about extending out the other side any longer.
I have, but then I thought I
simple
already
issue.
have enough work with going through these issues. If I extend it even longer, it's going to be even more work because, well, the range is going to be wider. Like this grows this direction. But it's not a bad idea.
Awesome. I think that's a great idea to add that on, to add move it to a year, personally.
Okay, so let's do that.
Yeah, 6 months seems like a long time, but often I find trends not very obvious. So a year looks nice.
Yeah, it's going to become important to have to be able to mark outliers, because I think it might, I don't know how Prophet uses like things like this, how it influences the prediction still.
Well, it says in the doc that you link, like it's like outlier support. So you're like, oh great, it can handle outliers. And what it says is like, if you have
Mark your
outliers, you should
outliers.
remove them. And basically it says remove them and we'll ignore empty data points. That's how it supports them. So you have to remove them. And then, which is from our perspective, like the easiest thing to do as well. Like, we don't have to like do anything fancy with them. If we know a date range where there's a problem, with a metric, or maybe not even a problem with a metric,
But an
but
incident that we know about and has been fixed or something like that.
yeah, exactly. Like, you know, we know that like, oh, hey, like everything blew up then we don't need to consider that in the forecast if it was like not germane to future trends. I mean, we do need to be a bit careful with that because we need to be clear on the distinction between like, you know, this was a genuine like outlier versus this was something that we wish hadn't happened, but you know, was based on usage or whatever. So yeah.
So when we get to 2 or 3 years, are we going to turn on annual trends? Because you can do that in
Profit,
yeah,
right?
because
So
that would
say-
help with the seasonality, right? Because I think part of the problem with the seasonality thing is that Profit can
Yeah.
detect seasonality, except we don't like the
yeah,
holiday period. For
we
instance,
don't
at the end
turn it
of
on
the
for
year.
annual, right? We don't have
we don't have.
Yeah, because like yeah.
yeah.
Will having a
That's-
year
that's,
allow Profit to do a better job?
I don't.
A
I
year
don't. I think you need multiple years.
I would hope it wouldn't make it do a worse job. Is the way I'm thinking about
Well,
it.
no, I wasn't thinking
More
of
data is
having
better.
annual patterns. Like a year is of course not going to work, but
I
for
think having
weekly patterns
more
or
than a year. I don't think it's going to particularly help with like the weekly pattern because it already had that. I think. I think we're.
But more data is pretty much going to be better, right?
That's the assumption. Like in scrolling through, we don't see anything.
MOAR data. More.
I wouldn't be opposed to having 2 or 3 years in there. I think.
well, better start uploading zip files then.
Yeah, it would be nice to have metrics that have been around for that long in a stable that mean the same thing for that long as well, which we do have quite a lot of. So yeah.
I think as long if we change them, like we've done before, we've worked with the V2 thing and so on to have it separate. I think we should figure out a way to not do that, so we can have the same name and then we can add the change point or like have it detect the change point. But yeah, for now, let's just start with a year's worth of data and see where that gets us. The last thing I wanted to call attention to was the Postgres primary CPU. The issue is linked there. People are working on it, but just spreading the word out a little bit because this is something to worry about and it's often not an easy thing to resolve. I don't have anything more than that to say about that.
Since I think Dave is not here, I'll just touch on 0.5. Like it's a pretty short one, so there's still room for more points. So I think last two weeks before, I brought up I was explaining the mystery error with Redis cluster rate limiting. So the patch was fairly simple. So I opened up 2 issues to discuss with the maintainers, and I think they were pretty excited. They're pretty like alright to accept version 5 because that's the one that I'm maintaining now. But 4.8, the maintainer said that they are not open to backports. So in that issue, I've added all the GitHub links. So yeah, I think you have to live with a monkey patch. We can't really put it in and then enjoy the code changes on the gem side. But the good news is for Redis v5, when we upgrade, we can enjoy that change without having to do any patch on our own. So but I don't think we'll be getting it soon because we're kind of blocked on Rails 7 followed by Sidekick 7. Yeah, 7. And then only then can we do Redis upgrade to version 5. Yeah. Yeah, so other than that, not much for me. I think I probably won't share screen and show the patch because it's pretty simple and it's yeah, I think in the previous round showed a bit of it already. The version 5 patch is just a slight modification. So yeah, Jakob can take over.
Thanks. I was I am on call as IMOC for a couple of days this week, and I was paged on Tuesday. Or on Tuesday there was an incident where where we spent a long time trying to understand what the problem was. And one thing that maybe this is a good audience for that I found confusing, and sorry I didn't prepare this, but I'll just share my screen and quickly show it because that works better. We were getting an alert from Patroni main, or that was this app-text thing was alerting. And we really had a problem on the CI cluster, but Patroni CI doesn't have an app-text. It only has error ratio, RPS, and saturation. And RPS was clearly elevated, and at some point it took us way too long to find out that the problem was here and not on the other Patroni cluster. And there was some sort of spillover effect going on where the other one was also slowing down. So I'm curious, why isn't there an app-text here?
I mean, my only guess is that it just was not, it was an oversight when that was split.
Yeah, it's the same
and
oversight we had for Redis
Right.
that
We should
Alejandro
fix
now
it, though.
fixed. Alejandro fixed it for Redis. We should fix it for Patroni CI.
Where should I
Yeah.
make an issue for this?
Yeah.
Scalability or?
Does it
Start with
correct it?
scalability and we'll see.
Yeah.
Let's say.
I mean,
The other
ideally,
fun,
the database team should do it, but yeah, it doesn't really matter. But yeah.
Yeah, we spent quite a lot of time in that incident just trying to find the problem, and this
So-
was a big distraction.
So the way that it spills over is interesting because, sorry, just before you move on, because does that mean that we have a lot of transactions that are being held open kind of with across both of the Postgres instances, and then if one of them slows down, the other one basically struggles because there's lots of client transactions? Is it something like that?
I am not sure. I was in the incident for 3 hours, and by the end of that, it was still not clear what was going on. And I handed over to the next IMOC, and I haven't caught up yet on what the cause of what was really going wrong. But it took quite a long time to figure out.
Wow.
And there was a different incident yesterday, so I also didn't read up on what happened yesterday. But going back to Tuesday, another thing that was confusing, and I just want to highlight here because people know about Sidekiq, is that the Sidekiq database load balancer, if it can't find a secondary that is up, so the Sidekiq database load balancing works by putting an attribute on the job that says I want to see these wall offsets. And if I can find these wall offsets on a replica, then I'm going to use this replica, not use a Postgres primary. And that's good because then you're not using the primary. The problem is that if this job gets picked up by the Sidekiq server process and it doesn't see these offsets, it uses an exception to force a Sidekiq retry. Because I think the idea is if we wait a while, maybe the replicas have caught up. So this insane spike in Sidekiq errors is all these I want to be delayed exceptions, not something's broken exceptions, but I want to be delayed. And then another fun thing here
It's
was
like should be like a 4xx rather than a 5xx in Sidekiq terms, right? It should be like a soft error, like a non-counting error.
Should it though?
it's not even an error. It's just I want this
Yeah.
job to be delayed.
Yeah, but
But
yeah.
the delay there is the better option other than using the primary, but it's still not good and we'd still want to know.
Yeah, but that was very confusing. And then the other fun one was this
Kind
one.
of amazing that there's still files that the last person to have touched it was Yorick.
Oh, I didn't even see that, but
Yeah.
yeah. So this class, this method is where we check if a replica can be used. And notice this rescue here. So when this rescue happens, this method returns false. And if all the replicas return false, then the database load balancing code in Sidekick raises this exception of I want to be retried. So what's
Mm.
happening here is that we were masking real errors and instead saying, oh, there is a database load balancing problem. Because the problem wasn't even that the replicas weren't up to date. There was something else. I think the thing was just saturated, like all the backend connections between PG Bouncer and but the Postgres servers were constantly in use. So we were getting one of these connection errors,
Yeah.
which include PG error. So this is the idea of just masking all of these and instead saying, well, let's retry the load balancing is not good for discovering what's wrong
How
in
is
an
an
We should be
actual
instance.
much
template
pickier on
error?
those. Yeah.
How is an actual view template error a connection error? I don't.
Yeah.
But Andrew just pointed out I should ask Yorick, which is not.
So my guess is with those that action view template error wraps the other error, but I think we can use exception.cause to figure out what the actual
Yeah,
exception
we should
was.
be very, very careful about.
I'm not even sure we should be catching these.
So what are the genuine use case? Like when is it that will throw an exception?
If this
that
query
you want to
fails,
treat it as false?
then why do you want to go on with the job on the primary?
That's what
But
I agree. Like,
you do want to try the next replica. If one replica
Yeah.
fails, you don't want to.
yeah. But that's
Fails as in the replica is unavailable.
Yes, if one replica is unavailable, we don't want this to stop trying, but we want this to try the next replica to check if it's
So this
called
is
up.
a sort of client-side high availability.
Yes.
Yes.
But do we not want to just do that by getting Sidekick to repost the job and retry it?
This
Well,
code
that's
is
what
also
it's doing.
used. This code isn't this code also used for web?
Could be.
Oh yeah, because it's in
This
the
looks
developing-
generic, like it's not just for Sidekick.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think
yeah,
there's a method in there, select up to date thing that iterates
Yeah.
them until it finds one that's called up. But if called up raises,
Oh, sorry, it's this query, but
Yeah.
it doesn't matter.
if called
Right.
up raises, then it's going to fail the method and yeah.
Yeah, so we want to transparently on the web. In the web case, we want to transparently handle a replica being
That's
down.
Two
And that's
corrective
why we need to
actions for
rescue.
you already, Jacob.
Sorry?
Two corrective actions you need to
Yeah, I
make
don't know why
already.
I'm doing this to myself, but at least I get quick answers to why things work the way they work by asking. Okay, I guess I need to make corrective actions now, but thanks for looking at this with me.
So
Most-
this sort of ties in a little bit with that saturation that Bob kind of raised, and it kind of feels a little bit scary at the moment. Like there's sort of a
We're
few different
we're
threads that
we're
need to be
slowly
going.
approaching the thing we were in last year before the.
Yeah, that's what's scary.
That's why I'm now shouting it everywhere.
Yeah, but how do we like, pods is we're not going to do another functional decomposition.
Aren't we?
And, well,
I mean, if we are, who's going to do it? Because the team that did that is working on cells.
yeah. So what's the, and I mean, I know that there's some fairly noisy pieces, like again, the old scanner, or what, the container scanner and or license scanner or whatever it is. But like, do we have good accounting? Do we have good accounting of exactly what in there is? How much of our resources those sort of
No.
features are consuming? Like, is there something where we sort of emergency sort of?
We've done a few things that Nikolai pointed out from a Postgres.ai, some kind of report that highlights some expensive queries, but I think that resulted in 2 things that will have been done, but I don't know. We don't have
Is
a
there
measure
like a
on how
rapid
it's done.
action type situation approaching?
We need to wait for an S1 first.
It's leaving it awful late considering all the things that are going on, but okay.
Now, I was being a bit cynical, but I
Yeah, I know.
don't know how much traction. I think Bob is absolutely right, and to be
Yeah.
sounding the alarms about this, but I don't know how much traction it's going to get until things really go wrong.
Yeah.
We would have raised this in the engineering allocation meeting, I guess, except that
But like
that no longer exists.
Alan is already involved, so
But I think we need development as well.
Yeah.
At least, like, we don't necessarily have anything concrete to request from development right now. Maybe we need to go and figure out what that is.
I think like, so, you know, when InfraDev was, you know, happening, I think one of the things that really helped is if you could go there and you could really point and say, here, and the scalability team is quite uniquely placed to do that. Like, here is, you know, a big problem that, you know, this, and you really kind of put it on somebody's lap and say, like, this needs to be fixed straight away, and then everyone can rally around that. And maybe it's up to the scalability team to help with I don't know.
do you
I'm
mean
not
that
involved in this at
we
all.
need to find out what to do, like what we are going to do?
We don't need to fix it, but we need to find the problem, maybe, like, or at least if there's any easy wins.
Yeah, I talked to Jakob about this earlier. I need to look at this sidekick thing.
Yeah, because
Well-
it seems like it's pretty scary at the moment.
So one thing I found strange or frustrating in that first incident I was in, I mean, apart from I was the IMOC, so I'm not supposed to investigate. But
Yeah.
even if I hadn't been the IMOC, I would have been pretty helpless and
Yeah,
analyzing what's going on with Postgres. I don't have the expertise to look at a melting Postgres server and see what it's busy doing. But how many people know how to do that? How easy is it to do that? So how many, like,
yeah,
if
I'm
we can
curious.
find things and then we,
Yeah.
like Andrew says, we can hand them to development and say, here's a thing that is inefficient or is clearly costing a lot, there needs something done about them, but how do we find them? Who's able to find them? Can we train more people or empower more people to find them?
I'm curious, you know, there's all that stuff a while ago around marginalia, plus tying that to statement IDs. There's a doc in the runbooks called Postgres mapping, something like that, which describes, like, were people using that sort of information, the marginalia and the PG stat statements, and because you can kind of tie all those things together now, and it gives you a much better view of what's happening inside Postgres.
It's
What
still a
I saw in
manual
that
thing, though.
incident, sorry?
It's still a manual thing, and I don't know off the top of my head to figure out the query IDs that are causing a problem, because
It took 2.5 hours to get somebody in the incident who knew how to do that.
There's a runbook document.
Okay, but nobody in the incident, myself included, knew that that was there or how to find it or to start using that. And eventually, people who knew enough started to look in the right places.
Let me find it. I mean, not that it's too late now, but I mean, it makes you wonder. Mapping statements here. I'm just going to put it in the doc. And it sort of describes how each of those things can kind of map together.
And I'm not in a lot of incidents, but what I found interesting was that the initial reaction here was more along the lines of, we need to increase the limits on PG Bouncer, or we need to tweak some infrastructure knobs.
Yeah.
And because I'm a backend developer, my first thought is the application is doing something bad, and we need to find out what bad thing the application is doing.
Yeah.
Also, we're kind of running out of PG bouncer knobs to tweak.
Yeah.
Well, there's
That was what I said to Ken yesterday as well. He said, "Are we going to add more PG bouncer slots?" And I was like, "Well, you know, there's only a certain number of Postgres connections, so." You know,
what I wanted to ask is if there are people in here who observe more incidents, and I think there are, how often is it a problem you solve by turning Postgres knobs, and how often is it the fault of the application? Just qualitatively, roughly.
I haven't been in an instant call in like a year.
Okay.
So I wouldn't know at all. I mean, are those
Well, this is another thing I mentioned to Jakob is I think we've gone from the same few people being in like basically every incident call, which is bad, to having certainly on the incident manager side, like a huge rota, which means that like Jakob said, he doesn't have much experience of being an incident manager, even though he's been on the rota for quite a while, because you know, and I'm not saying people should have more shifts. I don't have an answer to this. I just think we might have got a bit too diffuse there.
Yeah. Well, my question is, my instinct is to say we need to spend more, we need to invest in understanding how the application is driving Postgres. And if we can find wins there, then we can buy headroom on Postgres. But I don't know enough about the actual practice of what goes on with Postgres in the application, if that's true.
So going back to your point about like infrastructure, people looking at infrastructure knobs to turn, like, I think that's where the scalability team are quite uniquely placed, because they can kind of translate between the infrastructure world and the application world much better. And they can say, you know, sure, we can change this PG bouncer connection pool, but like, why don't we fix this thing in the application? Because there's a client transaction that's holding on to a transaction for 10 minutes or whatever it is. And I mean, maybe one of the things to do is to start saying that, you know, we need to help out on more, like if the temperature's rising and things are kind of getting more scary, maybe it's time like we become more involved in those things. And actually, because I don't know about you, but I've been very disconnected from incidents on GitLab.com for a while. I don't know what they're fighting and how they're fighting it. But if
Same, I looked at this one because it turned out to be really like tangentially related to an MRO merge, but yeah, mostly I'm just like, well, my shift will come around and I'll deal with stuff that's on my shift.
Yeah, and that's you know, maybe it's something where we should be suggesting application changes as well in some places.
Yeah,
What you're
I
saying
know
is we
I'm
should
biased
more
because I'm an application developer, but I also it's one of my preferred things to reach for is to make the application do
Totally,
less
but
stuff.
Jakob as well. Also, the people on the call are biased because they're
Yeah,
you know,
I
Postgres engineers, and
understand
that
but
you need the balance, right, of people who can.
yes, but I don't have the big picture experience to know like if we're in balance or what that should look like.
Yeah, but I mean, common sense sort of dictates that if you have, you know, 500 database connections, and you know, ultimately, and you have something that's taking a very long time, it doesn't matter how you shuffle the pools around for those database connections, there's still only 500 database connections, and the consumption is the problem, right? You've got to go upstream. But yeah. Okay.
It's too bad none of our managers are in this call, because it's something also that
I'll raise it. I'll raise it
too, but I think you're making a valid suggestion that maybe we can make a difference by spending time on it, but that is something that we also need our managers to agree with.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think it's pretty clear that the Postgres saturation is
becoming
like you said, Bob's right to keep raising it up, because it is. I mean, like Hercules and I noticed a side effect of it when we were looking at just some endpoint that's called a lot, and we noticed that it got slower during some periods, and then, you know, there's no reason for the endpoint to get slower, but it turns out that the connection pool was slightly more saturated during that time, so we can see the downstream effects like everywhere.
Yeah.
What I like, things are moving on that issue, and people are doing stuff. The thing that that worries me is that I don't know how much of an effect they will have. Like I saw Nikolai mention an issue about a query that I know of, so I pinged the right team with suggestions on how to fix it, but I don't know if that's going to be a 10% drop in CPU utilization or not. Is it going to be visible at all or not?
Well, we got better at this with Redis, I feel. Like I know we've taken shots at Redis, like, oh, let's optimize this and optimize that, and then some things did almost nothing, and some things paid off. And I feel like over time, we've gotten a better handle of what is going to pay off and make a difference. But I don't know who's been doing this with the database, or who has that knowledge, or has been doing it for long enough to recognize the good opportunities.
Jose was always good at that, but well,
I mean, same as Redis, but Matt. Same answer, same person, but yeah.
I mean, just kind of looking at it from a bigger picture point of view, I'm trying to find a merge request now, but like sometimes what I see with like some of these things that we know are really expensive on the database at the moment, like on dedicated, we have these reports, you know, of lint, effectively like linting reports, and no one looks at them, and there are literally thousands of items in them, and it's this feature that GitLab's got on, and you know, every time you run a pipeline, it's generating more of these results, and you know, we're not using them, and it's unusable because there's too much information in there. And I wonder how much of this is related to that as well. Like if we know that container scanning is one of the things, and I know from the projects that I'm working on, it's not usable because there's too much information in there. And so there's kind of like it's a feature that maybe in some circumstances isn't tuned correctly, and it's putting load on our database. Like, can we fix the problem further upstream by actually making the feature more precise?
Bob, am I misremembering, or did container scanning also come up for like a sidekick job where they were like, you know, our job's trying to run for like 7 hours?
Yes. There was a super long
and
job.
it's not able to run for 7 hours. What can we do?
I want to react to this because this is a good example of something that looks fishy, or that might be an opportunity. But the problem is we have limited opportunity to solve problems, so we need to pick the most impactful ones. And this sort of even if this is an impactful one on dedicated, that doesn't tell us that it would be impactful on .com.
Yeah. But if there's lots and lots of sort of what I'm thinking is, if there's lots and lots of teams that have all got this turned on by default, and I'm just trying to find a good example now, but actually, interestingly enough, the one I looked at has got 0. So maybe I'm being maybe it's already been improved. But let's just go take a look. This one. Yeah, I don't know. It sounds like we need to kind of look into this a bit more. Yeah, I don't know. I can't actually find the type of issues that I was complaining about. So maybe it's gone away already. But I'll raise it like in my way as well, because I think it seems to be getting hotter. Cool.
Well, should we wrap up?
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.